I'm a partner and head of the employment team at Stewart's. I advise employees and employers on all employment and HR issues, including in relation to redundancy, which is the focus of this short video. I'm joined today by Arpad Szakal, who is a consultant at Cormis Partners. Cormis provides recruitment solutions to a wide range of businesses, including those operating in the aviation industry. Arpad is also a career transition coach with the Centre for Aviation Psychology, and he's going to talk to us about that in more detail in a moment. And after Arpad has done that, I will then consider some of the challenges facing employees working in aviation at the moment. We are all too familiar with the problems facing airlines across the world as planes remain grounded due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the last 6, 7, 8, 9 months, many pilots, cabin crew, and others working in aviation have lost their jobs as airlines seek to cut costs. And so hopefully those watching this video today will learn a bit more about the processes that employers should be following in making staff redundant, but also, and perhaps more importantly, what steps employees working in aviation can take in the short to medium term if they have very recently lost their jobs. But before we talk in a bit more detail about redundancy, Arpad, I know you want to talk a bit about the role that you perform for the Centre for Aviation Psychology. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Joe. Just really briefly for the listeners, the center was set up back in 2016 with the aim of supporting the carriers, the AOCs, the air operators, to provide their pilots access to peer support programs. It's an EASA, European Aviation Safety Agency requirement as of Valentine's Day, 14th of February 2021, requiring all AOCs to provide their pilots access to peer support programs. And this is the main purpose of the center, to facilitate that to airlines. We currently provide support programs for, I think it's nearly 20 airlines registered in 11 countries. That's one aspect. The other aspect is redundancy and outplacement support for all those who have been impacted by the pandemic, Joe. So it's not only pilots, but also senior technical personnel, also executives in the industry. We're trying to get them from A to B as quickly as possible in terms of finding their next role in or outside of the industry. So that's the center, and that's my role within it.
And I'm sure you're very busy at the moment, Arpad.
Yeah, there is basically an increased workload as of summer last year. Joe, it was, I think up until then, a lot of people believed that this is just another SARS like we had it back in 2003, but it turned out to be very different from that. So Joe, let's look at some of the legal aspects of redundancies. Are you seeing a lot of these, especially in the aviation sector at the moment?
Yeah, in short, Arpad, yes, we are. I mean, we are seeing more redundancies at the moment than we have done for a number of years. I don't think that will come as a surprise to you or anybody watching this video. But the pandemic has had a particularly devastating effect on the aviation sector and the aviation industry. As airlines seek to reduce costs, they have implemented large-scale job cuts as they struggle to deal with the restrictions on their operations. all airlines have been affected by the pandemic, and the big players in the aviation industry, for example, British Airways, Emirates, and Virgin, have all made a number of large scale job cuts over the last 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. Can you explain to the viewers what redundancy really means?
Yeah, I can. I mean, in brief terms, redundancy situations can occur when a business closes, when a workplace or a site closes, but more commonly when there is a diminished requirement for employees to do the work that they are employed to perform. So, as planes are grounded and remain grounded, there is a diminished need for pilots to fly planes and for engineers and cabin crew um, and everyone else working in aviation to carry out their work. And in the UK, redundancy is potentially a fair reason for dismissal.
Yeah. No, that's clear. And Joe, do employers need to do more than just simply tell employees that they are no longer needed, they're being made redundant, and then dismiss them?
Well, all employees with at least 2 years of service in the UK have the right not to be unfairly dismissed. And in order to dismiss an employee fairly for redundancy, first of all, there must be a genuine redundancy situation. And I've just explained when a redundancy situation might occur. But secondly, the employer has to act reasonably in dismissing an individual. So the short answer to your question is, do employers need to do more than tell employees they are redundant before dismissing them? Well, yes. An employer must carry out a fair process, and that normally involves warning and consulting employees about the proposed redundancy. If there are more than 20 employees at risk of redundancy, an employer must consult with staff individually, but also collectively. And an employer has to adopt a fair process on which to select employees for redundancy. And this can involve pooling together groups of employees at risk of redundancy, and then applying selection criteria to those selected. And the final part of a fair redundancy process, Arpad, is considering suitable alternative employment within the organisation. So that duty applies until the bitter end of the process. So employers must continually think about alternatives to redundancy and must consider suitable alternative employment for those at risk of redundancy.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. We've seen, of course, quite a number of airlines taking actions, a number of redundancy rounds completed, not only in the UK, but internationally as well. But by the way things are going, it's definitely, we're not really at the end of the road yet. What can an employee do if they are told they are at risk of redundancy at the moment?
Well, any employee who is told that they are at risk of redundancy will quite understandably become worried and distressed. Knowing that you may lose your job can be overwhelming, and particularly so during difficult economic times. We are close to entering a recession if we're not in one already, and employees who do lose their jobs will enter the most difficult job market for a generation. So employees who are told they are at risk will be worried and distressed. Having a good understanding of how a redundancy process will work and what an employer should be doing as part of a redundancy process will, I think, provide those affected with some comfort. There's nothing wrong with asking an employer uh, questions about the process, and trade unions can also be helpful. So employees who are members of trade unions may find that their trade union can provide them with some useful and helpful information. Employers must hold at least 2 consultation meetings with each individual affected. And during those meetings, employees should be given the opportunity to put forward their own views as to how redundancies can be avoided. Um, and often employees have ideas that employers haven't thought of. Um, Alternatives to redundancy might include reduced working hours, unpaid leave, recruitment freezes, for example. So a top tip for employees who are told that they are at risk of redundancy is start thinking early and quickly about how redundancies can be avoided, because employees may have ideas that will work, but which their employer hasn't thought of.
Yeah, yeah. So, what are the what can an employee do? What are their options if they are dismissed for redundancy, Joe? Maybe in a few bullet points, if you can outline them.
Yeah, well, interesting you say in a few bullet points, Arpad, and I think that's right, because every case will be different, and different rules apply in different jurisdictions. So there's no one size fits all approach that employees can adopt if they are dismissed on the ground of redundancy. I mean, I would say this because I'm a lawyer,
Yeah.
but I think it's in an employee's interests to take legal advice early on, and before dismissal, actually. If the decision to select an employee for redundancy looks a bit suspect, or if an employer fails to carry out a fair process, an employee might have grounds for challenging their selection and or their dismissal. So taking advice early is always a good idea. And some employers will take shortcuts. Warning signs might include employers failing to consult meaningfully with affected staff, failing to identify an appropriate pool of employees for redundancy selection, or applying unreasonable scoring criteria to those employees at risk. So if an employee is dismissed, and they think their dismissal is unfair or might be unfair, they should be given the opportunity to appeal. And if any appeal is not successful, employees can bring a claim in the employment tribunal in the UK, as long as they have 2 years of continuous service, and they can bring a claim for unfair dismissal. I think
Yeah.
at the moment, given the circumstances we find ourselves in the current climate, employers who follow a fair redundancy process, so they consult with staff, they consider alternatives to redundancy, they do all that they need to in order to make sure that the process is fair, are unlikely to be on the hook for unfair dismissal claims. Every case will be different, but you can see, Arpad, why there are a number of large-scale redundancy exercises ongoing at the moment, and in fact, have already been completed.
Yeah.
And if an employee is not going to challenge the fairness of their dismissal, in terms of practical next steps, well, they might want to start thinking quickly about taking appropriate steps to find new employment, or perhaps commencing training with a view to finding new employment. Um, and often employers will give and should give employees who are given notice of their dismissal for redundancy time off even before the dismissal has taken effect, to start looking for new employment or to start new training with a view to finding new employment. So, and I think that's an issue that you probably know more about than I do, Arpad, in terms of what pilots and those working in aviation can be doing and should be doing if they are at risk of losing their job or do in fact lose their job. And I know that's something we're going to talk about in a moment.
Yeah. Joe, let's assume that the worst has happened. Someone was made redundant. Can a commercial pilot start a new job straight after their employment comes to an end at one particular carrier, or whether it's flying or non-flying role?
In most cases, the answer will be yes. Pilots who are made redundant might be paid in lieu of notice, and so they won't have to work their notice periods, and so they can start work straight away. Others will be asked to work their full notice period. Others may be placed on garden leave for the duration of their notice periods, in which case there will be a short delay before they can start a new job. Some pilots will have restrictive covenants, sometimes called post-termination restrictions, in their employment contracts, which prevent them joining or might prevent them joining a competing airline for a specified period of time. However, in the current circumstances, I'd be surprised if airlines hold pilots to such restrictions if they are made redundant. I am interested, Arpad, in what steps you think pilots and others working in aviation should be taking if they have recently lost their jobs. Do you want to tell us a bit about the work you've been doing in that respect in the last weeks and months?
So those pilots who have really been making a successful career pivot from flying into other things have been applying the following strategies. They've definitely viewed this as a chance to reinvent themselves and find something that is sustainable in the long run as well, even in times when there is a recession like now. They've also done a lot of reflection. They're taking stock. I think it's really, really important before rushing into things. Just being calm and cool-headed, I think that helps a lot. Also, creating a compelling career narrative. This is really important because you really understand where you need to understand where you're coming from and where you want to get to. And I think the other thing I would like to mention is really the ability to taking ownership of the process and proactively start building relationships with organizations, with individuals within those organizations that you would like to approach, that you would like to get into. Right after redundancy, in the short term, commercial pilots typically find opportunities in the following fields. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that you remain in these, but it's certainly a good way to bridge the gap, the financial gap, and provide for your family or for yourself. So things that I've seen, obviously, delivery drivers, warehousing roles, roles with the police even. Bus locomotive driving positions, various roles with the Amazon type of companies who are really actively out there hiring. would really encourage people to look into those. And other distribution companies, not only in the UK but globally, they need people. I think it's a really good way to just provide for your needs until you find something that is better or more sustainable. Some also gained really valuable experience doing not only full-time permanent roles, but things like volunteering with organizations that you're interested in potentially getting a full-time permanent role with. Part-timing, that could be another avenue, but also contract roles for a fixed period of time. Consulting contracts, consulting arrangements are also an avenue if you can't really get a full-time permanent contract right from the get-go. Doing business mentoring, offering your experience, your prior experience for free for organizations that you would like to work for, could be another avenue as well, although it's not paid, but it could provide an avenue for you to build relationships and maybe even get to know hiring managers within the organization. The sectors, the industries where pilots have been successful transitioning into have included things like other forms of transportation. Let's remember things like shipping, road transportation, urban mobility, even air mobility have been out there hiring. There has not been a hiring freeze there. Some of those organizations are doing okay at the moment. Distribution, energy, the energy sector, especially renewable energy in terms of solar power, wind, they're quite active at the moment. Sustainable green aviation, that could be an avenue for many. That's where you can really utilize your flying experience, the fact that you are an insider, an aviation insider. You can really sell yourself in those kind of roles as well. And I've even seen people making a transition into things like web development, anything sales, business development related, things where you really don't need any technical skills, but you really need to be the type who can really market things, advertise things, can sell yourself. And also in terms of the specific roles, positions, commercial pilots have been able to secure over the past few months, half a year, 8 months, have been really project management, in particular, any kind of operations managerial roles, transport planning, IT related roles, technical managerial roles, and also risk management would be something that I would really highlight as a potential avenue for individuals who have to make a transition. Also things like agile and also Lean Six Sigma. It's something that I would definitely encourage people to look into, because others have found it beneficial and have even landed roles in it. When it comes to reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling, I would advise people to really think about this twice, because while I do believe that you obviously have to keep your options open by looking into other either degrees or certifications, I wouldn't advise you to jump into an MBA or an MSc that requires significant amount of time, energy, and most importantly, money. This is not a good time to get into debt. I think you really need to be very critical in terms of what you invest yourself into. Do your due diligence. I would really advise you to talk to people who have the qualification, see how they have fared with it. If they found it beneficial, if the qualification is the reason why they managed to secure a role. I think doing the due diligence, talking to people, is the only way that you are going to be able to really establish whether it's a good use of your time or it's probably not. The main challenges commercial pilots have been facing, or what I've observed, is really demonstrating their value to employers outside of the aviation industry. It's remarkable that many outside of the sector are just not really aware of the skills, both the soft skills as well as the hard skills. Aviation, or particularly pilots, can bring with them. I think really creating comfort in the minds of the hiring managers and the recruiters that they do have the right sort of set of skills. I think that's definitely something that I would highlight. And the other one is how long are you going to stay? So if the industry picks up in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, how long do I have you for? And that's something that really needs thought. You really need to reassure people that you give that give you the opportunity to transition into something else, that you will stay with them, and then you really are not going to rush back to a flying role the moment they become available. So, having mentioned briefly the skills, what do you bring? Some of the most important transferable skills that I would include, or that I would point out, particularly for commercial pilots, would be complex problem-solving skills, the team working skills, the leadership skills, the project management skills. Obviously, as a pilot, you are the ultimate project manager. There is the planning phase, the execution phase, the follow-up phase, the time management, the flexibility, the adaptability. There are very few people out there who had 6 figures or maybe even more invested by their employers into their training. So you really need to change your mindset when you're talking to employers. You need to really make sure that they know, or that they are aware that you are someone who's technically savvy, a tech savvy, highly numerical, mathematics, analytical mind, that you can really do things other than piloting an aircraft. So basically, make sure that you really highlight on your CV, on your marketing documents, that you have good, tangible skills that are in fact very much needed in today's very difficult climate. So my top tip here at the end, I would also say, don't go it alone. Get yourself an accountability partner, someone who you can use as a job search buddy, someone who can keep you on track. This is really important, because, and even if you can invest in coaching, invest in someone who can really accelerate your progress quite considerably, because the competition is really out there. For every role advertised and not advertised, there are a lot of people who would like to get them. So get help, get people on board. Those would be my top tips for you, but reach out if you need to. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Arpad. Really interesting points. And I like your message about remaining positive, or trying to remain positive in trying and difficult circumstances. I really hope everyone watching this video today has found it helpful, useful, and interesting. And if you do want to ask any questions of me and or Arpad, please do get in touch. Our contact details will pop up on screen at the end of the video. Thanks very much.